This is the second topic for the lesson in Level 3 of Unit 2. So we're going to be looking at the least common denominator. Make sure that you already have the focus notes worksheet from your teacher. If you're at home and you don't have access to the worksheet, you can click on this link to see what the notes would look like. They look like this. And then you can set your notes up this way and follow along with the video. So the essential question we're looking at for this topic is, how do we rewrite fractions with a common denominator? And we're learning about this so that in the future we'll be able to rewrite fractions with common denominators to help us solve problems with unlike denominators. So the goal is basically to go from fractions with unlike denominators and just rewrite them so they have the same denominator. In order to do that, we're going to kind of back up for a minute and look at some vocabulary. And actually, first we're going to start with a question. The question is, how do all of these numbers relate to 3? So these numbers right here, 6, 12, 21, 30, and 39, they have a mathematical relationship to the number 3. And it turns out that all of these numbers are multiples of 3. Right? 6 is a multiple of 3, 12 is a multiple of 3, 21, 30, and 39. And by the word multiple, this is what I mean. This is your first definition on your notes. The product of any number and a whole number is a multiple of that number. So 6 is a multiple of 3 because 6 is a product of 3 and another whole number. 12 is a multiple of 3 because it's a product of 3 and another number. 21 is a multiple of 3 because it's the product of 3 and another whole number, and so on. And what you may remember from elementary school is that there are numbers that have common multiples. In other words, you multiply two numbers together, you get the product, and there is more than one number that has that number as its multiple. And that's called a common multiple. So a number that is a multiple of two or more numbers is called a common multiple. So what does that look like? On your notes, underneath the definition of common multiple, you have a section of a times table chart. And what I want you to do right now is you're going to pause the video and you're going to circle all of the multiples of 3 and 4 that they have in common. Right? So here in this row is all the multiples of 3, 3 times 0, times 1, times 2, times 3, times 4, and so on. And then here's all the multiples of 4. And I want you to go through and circle all the ones that they both have, like they both have 0, and so on. So pause the video, do that, and then come back. So here are the numbers that you should have circled. The common multiples of 3 and 4 are 0, 12, 24, and 36. And I should say these aren't the only multiples, right? Because, of course, you can have more numbers multiplied out here. You could have an infinite number. But these are the ones that we see on this part of the chart. The next question we need to ask ourselves is, why do we need all of these? We actually don't. To answer our essential question today, we only need something called the least common multiple. The least common multiple is the smallest number other than 0 that is a common multiple of 2 or more numbers. So here's all the common multiples. Which one other than 0 is the smallest common multiple? And if you look, other than 0, the next smallest one is 12. So the least common multiple of 3 and 4 is 12. That's most of the definitions we're going to look at. At this point, we're going to practice one more time just to make sure that you understand the idea of least common multiple. This next part is not in your notes, but if you want to follow along, you'll see this times table chart on the back of your paper, so you can turn it over. Right? So let's look at this. It says, what is the least common multiple of 6 and 9? Again, You find the two rows. Here's the multiples of 6, and here's the multiples of 9, and you find the least common one other than 0. So other than 0, if you go down the rows of multiples, what's the smallest one they have in common? Well, it turns out it's 0, right? 6 is not common to both, 12 is not common to both, but 18, yeah. 6 times 3 is 18, and 9 times 2 is 18. So that's the smallest multiple they have in common. If you didn't have a times table chart, you could just list out the multiples. Like here's 9 times 1, 9 times 2, 9 times 3, right? You can just list them out and then identify the common multiple that way. So now we're going to take a turn. And this is your last definition. It's the definition of least common denominator. Least common denominator is something that exists between two or more fractions. It is the least common multiple of two or more denominators in fractions. So what that means is you have to have two fractions to start with, and you have to find the least common multiple of the two denominators. So here's example 1. Right? We're going to rewrite 4/5 and 1/6 with the LCD, the least common denominator. Well, if our definition is that it's the least common multiple of the denominators, that has to be our first step. We have to find the least common multiple of 5 and 6, since those are my two denominators. So take a moment, pause the video. Here, I want you to list out the multiples of 6. Here on your notes, up here I want you to list out the multiples of 5. Here I want you to list out the multiples of 6 and identify the least common denominator. Pause the video and do that now. All right, so here's what it looks like if you listed out the multiples of 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on, and then you list the multiples of 6, right? 6 times 1, 6 times 2, 6 times 3, 6 times 4, and so on. You see that the smallest common multiple of 5 and 6 is 30. So wait, why did I do all that again? Oh yeah, that's right. My question is saying that I have to rewrite these two fractions with the least common denominator, which is the least common multiple. So now I'm ready to set that up. Let's look at the first fraction. I'm going to rewrite 4/5 using the new denominator, the least common denominator, which is 30. Now, what does that really mean? Well, you remember in a fraction, the number on top is the part, and the number on the bottom is the whole, right? And this should represent the same ratio of part to whole, but just written in a different way. But it should be equivalent. So here's a picture to kind of give you an idea of what we're going to do. Here's 4/5, right? 4 pieces out of 5. The whole is broken into 5 pieces, and 4 of them are shaded. 4 to 5, right? The number of pieces to the total of the whole. All I'm doing is now I'm taking the same value, and instead of breaking it into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces, instead I'm breaking that same whole into 30 pieces. Now, how do I do that mathematically? Let's think about it. 5 times some number will give me 30. And if you know your times table, or you can look on the chart, you know that 5 times 6 equals 30. But in order for this to be equivalent, right, for it to have the same value, like you can see here in the picture, the green takes up the same number, the same amount of space in both circles. That's what we want. We want it to be equivalent. If I know that 5 times 6 is 30, so I multiply the denominator by 5, I also have to multiply the numerator by 5. And it looks like this. 5 times 6 is 30, so that gives me the new whole, right, 30 pieces. And then 4 times 6, that's multiplied by the same number, equals 24. So it's 24 pieces out of 30. They look different, but they're equivalent. As you can see in the picture, they have the same value. So I've rewritten 4/5 with the least common denominator 30. Now I need to do the same for 1/6. So again, I have to think about how do I take 1/6 and convert it into an equivalent fraction that's out of 30 instead of out of 6. Again, if you look at the picture, that just means I'm going to take the fraction 1/6 that was 1 out of 6 whole total, right? And I want some number of pieces out of 30 instead. But this number of pieces here has to have the same value as this one piece did here. So I use the same idea. I look at the denominator, think to myself, 6 times what number equals 30? Well, 6 times 5 equals 30. And then what do I do to the denominator? I do to the numerator. So I multiply both the numerator and denominator by 30. And I see that my new whole, right, I've broken it into 30 pieces. And instead of one piece, I take 1 and I multiply it by 5. And it's 5 of these smaller pieces is equivalent to one of these big ones. So 1/6 is equivalent to 5 over 30. And if you look, have I rewritten both both fractions with the common denominator 30? Yes, I have. And that's as far as we're going to take it today. We're not going to try adding them or doing anything else with them. So let's look at one more example. Rewrite 2 2/7 and 1 3/5 with the least common denominator. I'm going to ask you to leave, these are mixed fractions, and I'm going to ask you to leave the whole number as it is and just focus on the fraction. So in order to find the least common denominator of these two numbers, we need to find the multiples of the denominators. In other words, we need to find the multiples of 7 here, and we need to find the multiples of the second denominator, 5. So you list those out. Right? 7 times 1, 7 times 2, 7 times 3, and so on. And then you list out the multiples of 5. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. And I'm going to stop right here because I see I have a number in common with my multiples of 7. So the least common denominator is the least common multiple of 7 and 5, which is 35. So now I'm going to take my fractions and I'm going to rewrite them with a new denominator of 35. So again, I think to myself, 7 times what number equals 35? And in this case, that would be 5. So I multiply the denominator and the numerator by 5. 7 times 5 gives me a new whole, 35. And 2 times 5 gives me a new numerator, the part, which is 10. Next, I'm going to do the same thing for the second number, 1 3/5. And what we're going to do is we're going to rewrite 1 3/5 as 1 and something over 35, the common denominator. So again, I think to myself, what number times 5 would give me 35? And 5 times 7 gives me 35. So I multiply the numerator and denominator by 7. 3 times 7 equals 21, and 5 times 7 equals 35. So I have accomplished my mission. I have rewritten the two fractions with the least common denominator, 35. So same value, but different denominator. This concludes the lesson. Make sure that you complete the summary. Remember that your summary should answer the essential question and should not start with the words I learned. You just talk about the answer to the essential question. Don't give any commentary on the lesson.